Welcome. My name is Fred Sandoval. I'm the Executive Director for the National Latino Behavioral Health Association, NALBA for short. Thank you for joining us today for today's Platica called Tenemos Voz, which means we have a voice. And this is on the topic of Latino peer recovery. NALBA is a nonprofit agency dedicated to the well-being of Latinos across the United States, as well as our families and our communities. Our mission is to address the great disparities and barriers affecting the behavioral health and wellness of Latinos. Today, we're excited to present our Plática series called Tenemos Voz on Latino peer recovery and the journey of hope and transformation. Plática is the Spanish word for conversation. So today, our conversation will highlight the work of our guest speaker, who I will introduce in just a little bit, and her experience in working with individuals in recovery. NALBA would like to thank the New Mexico Human Services Department, and particularly the Office of Peer Recovery and Engagement, for making this series possible. Each month through June 2023, NALBA will host speakers directly involved in recovery and to be able to share their stories, their insights, their experience, and also offer resources. So please join us every month for this live Facebook Platica, because we'd like to present these conversations so that you can hear about the important work that's being done to serve the Latino community. Having said that, we'd like to thank you once again for joining us today. And so I'd like to start by introducing our speaker and presenter today, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how the Platica works, and we're going to get started with our questions. So let's welcome Jessica Luzanilla. What a beautiful last name, by the way. And you'll have to tell us what it means. I'm curious, by the way. So she currently serves as the instructional designer for the Rocky Mountain Americans for Disabilities Act Center. And she's located in the beautiful city of Colorado Springs, Colorado. She, in her role, is responsible for developing curricula for adult learners to be delivered and facilitated in both in-person, virtual, and self-directed settings. As you know, all of this work simply means that she is helping educate and inform the communities using the center's e-learning platforms. The organization's free online training is important, so she'll get to tell us a little bit about the free part and the resource part. So let's look forward to her sharing more about that. She works very closely with the center's training facilitators to ensure the center's in-person and virtual trainings are maintained and customized, now that's a very important word, for clients in a way that ensures effective knowledge translation that will meet the needs of learners. So all of that to say is they take into consideration that what they want to teach and inform and educate is going to be user-friendly and is something that's acceptable for the people who are in fact seeking information and resources from the center itself. So with that, let me tell you what's the Platica entails. I already have a few questions ready, but I want to thank Jessica for also adding some additional questions so that she can feel confident knowing that she gets to impart this information with all of you. So I'll start with a couple of questions, and we're going to encourage you, the live Facebook audience, to put your questions or your comments live in the chat. And of course, we'll share that information with Jessica. And if you have a question for her, please ask her. I'll pass that question along. And more importantly, we're excited to get started. So Jessica, all of that to say, as part of this introduction, that we want to know a little bit more about you. So if you would be so kind to say a little bit more, because I know I kind of gave that official introduction, but we want to know who Jessica is. So tell us about your journey to the center and your passions, what your vision is for helping the communities that you serve. And we particularly want to know how that impacts the Latino community. So Jessica, you have the microphone.
Hi, Fred. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to participate in this Platica. I'll share a little bit more about myself. Like you said, I'm the instructional designer at the Rocky Mountain ADA Center. I've been there since April of 2021, so almost 2 years. In my role, I also, in addition to creating the online trainings, I also work on a podcast that we get to interview members of our community with disabilities across the country. We just had a podcast yesterday with Judy Human. She was our second two-time guest on our podcast, so we're excited to have her. A little bit about myself personally. I am a Mexican, Salvadorian American living in Colorado Springs. I was born and raised in Long Beach, California. I moved over here to the Springs about 4 years ago. Just wanted to explore a different chapter of my life and wanted to get away from the busy city life.
Sure.
So I've been here for 4 years. 2 weeks ago, actually. I've been in instructional design for almost 10 years. I worked in nonprofits and I also worked for a private organization years ago. But before that, I was working in education. I worked in special education for a while as well. So I had a little bit of knowledge about disabilities and the disability community, but it wasn't until I joined the Rocky Mountain ADA Center that I really, my world changed in a very good way. I started to view things differently with all the knowledge that I acquired as a person working for the ADA Center. And that is directly, it's a big part of how I design my courses and how I present the content to our audience. It's so important to keep the accessibility aspect of it, to making sure that everybody gets access to the courses and they have a great experience with it. Things such as text, colors, images, I make sure that they have all the right attributes at the alternative text. So if people are accessing our courses with just keyboards or they have a screen reader, I want to make sure that every element in there is presented to them and they're able to process the information and get some information in there. So I think that's so important that accessibility is at the beginning and throughout the entire process of everything that we create. So it's a little bit about myself.
Oh, wonderful. Well, if you've been in Colorado for 4 years, you probably had to adapt to the colder temperatures and the snow there, but it's a beautiful part of the country.
Absolutely, yes.
It's right up the corridor from us here in New Mexico, where I'm located. And so you mentioned accessibility. That is a big key word, not just for the Americans with Disabilities Act, which we'd like you to say a little bit more about, but why do you think accessibility is important?
To me, I think accessibility is very important because it allows everybody to have equal access to goods and services, to programs, to just anything. Just even going to the store, whenever I visit a store or visit a place of business, I kind of look at it and wonder how are people are accessing, or how are they entering these stores, and how are they entering these buildings? Is there a ramp, or how are they going to obtain the information, or how are they going to participate when they're in there? So it's very important that access is available to everybody regardless of where they're coming from. So it's very important, and it should be to everybody else also.
Yeah, that's a very good point. A colleague of mine who has been in a wheelchair for most of her life, starting as a child to adulthood, took a group of us who were part of a ADA committee called the Mayor's Committee on Handicap. So you can tell we were using old wording back in the 90s. That word has since changed way. But anyway, so she had us do an exercise. So we all met out at City Hall, and lo and behold, she had 10 wheelchairs, and she had us join her for a trip around downtown of the state capitol. And very quickly, we learned several things: the challenges of maneuvering in a wheelchair, and then all the limitations of things we could not access because we were simulating what it's like for a person who's in a wheelchair trying to access all the other things that all of us can have access to because of our physical ability to walk into buildings and to maneuver through all the access points, right? Crossing a street, having a sidewalk that's can accommodate a wheelchair. And then what do we do when it's time to go in the building if there are only stairs into that space? And the list goes on, right? So accessibility is the kind of thing that sometimes we can really understand when we have an exercise like that. But not all disabilities can be seen, and not all
No,
disabilities are obvious, right? Because what
no.
happens is we only have limited knowledge about all the range of disabilities that exist. So, anything that you want to say about that?
Yes, like you mentioned, you can't always see diabetes, or you can't always see a mental health disability. You can't always see it. So just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And there's, you know, my hope is that people understand that also, that it's not just about what you see, but it's everything else also with disabilities.
That's absolutely right. So I appreciate you wanting to have this conversation and this plática, right?
Hmm.
And so if you would do us a favor
Hmm.
and kind of put your teacher hat on, your instructor hat, because this is your forte, and in all of that, help us understand the ADA, just as a starting point, and then I've got some other questions for you too.
Sure. So the ADA stands for the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it's a federal civil rights law that was signed on July 26, 1990 by President Bush. And what the law is that it prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability, just like any other civil rights laws prohibit discrimination on the basis of race, sex, orientation, etc. And it's made up of 5 titles or sections. Um, and these sections apply to different um, employers, state and local governments, different everyday everyday things. But the gist of it is that there's discrimination is prohibited for this group of individuals with disabilities. I can go into a lot of detail into which each one of them are, but Title I deals with employment. So these are the requirements and sets of regulations that employers must follow to prohibit discrimination against people with disabilities during the employment process, whether it be during the hiring process or during the actual employment process. Title II deals with public services such as state and local governments, that they individuals with disabilities cannot be denied services because they have disabilities. And again, going back to the accessibility thing, it's important that their programs and activities are available to the public without any barriers. And this includes public transportation. So if an individual is taking a public bus or a bus to across town, they have to be able to do that without any barriers. Title III deals with public accommodation. So if I were to go to a grocery store or any other business that is private business, they also have to follow special guidelines that make sure that the buildings are accessible. And if they're not, they have different rules that they have to follow for that. Title IV deals with telecommunications, and that's for businesses that offer telephone service. We want to make sure that people that are deaf or hard of hearing or need TTYs, which are telecommunication devices for to communicate, they're able to do so. And the last title is Title V of miscellaneous. It's a provision that just prohibits the threatening or retaliation against people with disabilities or people who are helping people get information on disabilities and their rights under the ADA. So I know that was a lot, but
It was a lot, but I like the way you outlined the different types of, and you call them titles,
correct titles,
intended to
yes.
describe different sections of the law that apply to the things that you just described. And the one that you made reference to, and this is particularly important, is when you said accommodations.
Mm-hmm.
And so the accommodations is a two-way street. And there's the accommodations that a person needs, and then there are accommodations that are provided by the physical location, the company, the agency who's making their services accessible to the person who is making the request. So give me one example of what that looks like, just so our listening audience can start to see, so that's what that looks like.
Yeah, so going back to Title One, so if a prospective applicant has a hearing disability or is deaf, for example, and they need to be able to effectively communicate, they're going to require, or maybe require, it really depends. They might need a sign language interpreter. So the prospective employer has to provide sign language interpreting services so that both parties can communicate. Another example of that would be somebody who is already working at the organization and has diabetes and requires frequent breaks throughout the day to monitor their glucose levels or monitor their sugar levels. So that would be an accommodation and related to work for them to have those two.
So how would I go about asking for accommodations? So let's use me as an example.
Mhm.
So I have a type of disability and recognize that there are some things that, if accommodated, it makes it more accessible to receive services, supports, or to be able to engage just like any other citizens in the activities that are publicly funded or even privately supported in order to have the same quality of life as everyone else. So then how would I go about asking for accommodations, and what will I be asked about my disability? What might I experience?
So if you're an employee, for example, you can talk to your manager or talk to your HR representative to let them know what you need. That would sometimes mean disclosing a disability, letting them know that. You might need a different desk, for example. Working from home, I need a different kind of desk or a different kind of work, that kind of accommodation, I guess. But if it's related to something such as going to, let's say I'm going to the library and I want to return my books, but I can't access the drop-off box because it's all the way on that side and I can't get out because I have a hard time walking, then an accommodation I can request from the library would be, I can give them a call and say, hey, explain my situation. I need somebody to come by and help me deliver the book so that I don't incur any fines or anything like that. So that would be an example of an accommodation that, in this case, a Title II entity can provide for people using their services.
Oh, that's wonderful. So your center basically provides training to people in your communities. And what are the audiences, folks who would benefit from your training curriculums and the information you offer? Because you're in different states. So how
Correct.
can people access the services from the Rocky Mountain ADA Center?
So we are a part of 10 regional centers. So there's an ADA center closest to everybody. There's a website you can find out the one that's closest to. We have a phone number that you can call to get more information about the one that's closest to you. And I'll put that information down in the comments as we go. But yes, we provide services and training and information on the ADA for anybody who wants to learn more about it. I want to learn more about service animals in the workplace, or I want to learn more about accessible parking. I have a question about that, and we have trainings that will cover those topics. We do offer customized training, so if your organization wants more of a specialized type of training, we certainly do that. We at the Rocky Mountain ADA Center, we service 6 states: Colorado, Utah, Montana, Wyoming, North and South Dakota. So, but that doesn't mean that you can't access our courses. They're 100% free. You need to create an account, and then you have access to our catalog of different courses, and they vary from disability etiquette and awareness to Title I overview, Title II overview, and so on. So, and we're always adding new courses. So we encourage everyone to check our website out or check out the website of other ADA centers that are closest to them.
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing that information so folks here during today's live show can have that information. But we do record this Platica, and the beauty of
Mhm.
that is then it gets replayed afterwards. So we want
Yes.
to make sure that folks have access to that information on an ongoing basis because this gets posted on Dalba's Facebook page. And we tend to see people continue to view it, not just throughout today's session, but also post at the live show. And then it allows people to even ask comments. So, Jessica, please feel free to
I will very much
respond back.
stay involved. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a great way for people to stay connected to you because you've come on this live show to be able to share the wealth of knowledge and information that you have. So, tell me, where do you get your passion to want to serve persons who are experiencing difficulties, challenges of all types, physical and emotional, psychological, that really has had an impact on their lives. So where did you get your passion to want to serve others?
I think I've always been kind of just by nature, just a very caring person. I like to take care of my own. It sounds so silly. My family, my community, my loved ones. I'm very much that kind of natural caregiver. I took care of my dad for many years while he was sick. I continue to take care of my mom. My mom's a big part of my life. I'm just that me nace, like just to be that kind of caregiver. And what a great opportunity to work for the Rocky Mountain ADA Center because I get to, in a way, do the same thing in a different format, providing the information to our community. It's so important that we learn about it. Just because it doesn't affect us right now doesn't mean it won't affect us later. Or the information is helpful because we might have somebody that's close to us that has a disability. We just don't know it, or like the CDC says, 1 in 4 people in the U.S. has a disability, and 1 in 6 Latinos have disabilities. And it's the largest minority group that anybody can join at any time. So it's so important that we're just as educated as possible. You just don't know. And I think that's where I get my passion for wanting to continue to educate people on it as much as possible. And at the same time, I learn something new every day.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that data, by the way. Thank you for sharing the numbers. It kind of puts it in perspective, right? One
Yes.
in 4 across the entire country. That's 25% of the country.
Yeah.
And that's a very significant number. What we do know about the United States, which is different from other countries, is that we're getting older at a faster rate than other places. And that means as you age, things will change by the natural course of the human condition, right? So you can't run probably 26 miles when you're 86, and
You
maybe
can
could you run
certainly
on 20?
try.
Certainly try, and you can certainly try to use means to get there. But it's not to refute that people can't. It's just that sometimes there's going to be limitations that are
Yes.
physical or emotional in nature. And today we want to learn a little bit about how mental illness and addictions has adversely impacted the Latino community, and how might it ever become disabling in nature, and how is the ADA applied to those two types of conditions? What has been your experience in helping train and educate the communities about how mental illness and addictions is impacted by the ADA?
So everybody with a disability or people with disabilities, they're all protected under the ADA. But, it's important to know that with mental health, for example, it's a chronic and ongoing disability, and it's not something we typically recover from usually. There's medications that help us to, feel better and manage it. But just the different titles or different organizations that are, for example, we can be discriminated against in those areas. Substance use, for example, is covered as a disability as long as a person is, I'm trying to find the right words to say, not currently engaged in the illegal use of substances that are deemed illegal, and they are in recovery. And those two qualifications would qualify somebody for coverage under the ADA, as long as they're in recovery and they're not currently engaged in the illegal use of substances that are deemed.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was powerful information. We need to capture that in the chat there, because
Yes.
you just helped to describe something that's very significant in the field of behavioral health, right? Behavioral health is the term we use to describe things related to mental health and mental illness, and then things related to substance abuse and addiction. So those in combination come under that word. But what you just said was very powerful, because it's the significance of people in recovery, and how it is that there are circumstances that still impact them during the course of the recovery, right?
Yes.
Because what happens is things will happen to people physically and psychologically because of what ends up happening with certain types of substances, right? They're mind altering, they have great impact on the brain development and so on and so forth. But I appreciate you recognizing that there are protections under the law for people in recovery. That's your message. That's really important. And that's as it relates to substance abuse and addictions, right? Because people with mental health disorders can also be in recovery. So tell us a little bit about how mental illness and mental disorders, which is different than mental health, right? How those disabling conditions relate to the ADA.
So, like I said, individuals that have mental health disabilities and are in recovery do have protections under the ADA. They're not to be discriminated against for having those disabilities or impairments. And I'm trying to use I'm trying to pick up the right words, but it's not coming to me right now. So, yeah.
Well, it'll come to you before today, by the way. So you just get those words here to us when they. But we have a couple of questions for you from the listening audience. So let me share one first.
Okay.
Let you react to that. I have another question. So you have certainly invoked people's interest, curiosity. So we want to thank our colleagues from OPRI for listening in and joining us. The Office of Peer Recovery Engagement has done a phenomenal job in our state to really help people in recovery. And by encouraging it, supporting it, facilitating how we move people from where they've been to a new hope and a new vision of transformation for their lives, so they can be as successful and productive and as engaged as they can possibly be. But thank you, Opri, for joining us at today's event. So here's something from Dolores Respoto Macias. So this is what she says, Jessica. She says, "This is such a blessing to our communities." How cool is that, right? Somebody who just understands the value and the benefit of the work you're doing. And she first thanks you. And she's tuning in from Tucson, Arizona. And I said Tucson, but many people refer to it as Tucson, I think, is maybe the way we might pronounce it. And she says, "I'm a family peer support a specialist." And she goes on to say, and she's part of the University of Arizona, and they have a certification program they're called Project FUTRE, which stands for Families Uplifted Through Recovery Education. How phenomenal is that? So
that's
she's
a mouthful.
Yeah, I know. It's like our agency tells us about this long, right? That's why we say NALBA for short. But anyway, I want you to react to her, because we want to thank her for listening in. and then also encouraging her colleagues in sharing this recorded version so that we can continue to get the word across the country, because the 25% figure of persons with disabilities across the US impacts us across the nation, and it impacts all of us, right? So
Yes.
anyway, what would you like to say to Dolores, Jessica, just because all I could say is we were delighted when people kind of share their comments or express their gratitude. So go ahead.
Yes, I agree with Dolores. It's a blessing to have to have the information presented to our communities. This is a great opportunity to share some more information about the ADA and about what both organizations do. I think it's so important that we just educate ourselves as much as possible, and through these kinds of pláticas with our communities, just share the information and just say, hey, did you know this? Did you know that there are centers available or there's organizations available to help us out? You know, um, I love it. I love it. I love that that we were able to bless our communities that way, and great that we can share that information with everybody. And it's available to us. It's free. You know, so it's great.
That's absolutely right. And this is just one method, right? This live process is just one method, and there's so many more other ways of getting information out. So we want to be of service to the Rocky Mountain ADA Center to help, as you said, get the word out, because information is oftentimes missing. Their families,
Yes.
individuals just don't have the information. It's not readily available. Where do I go get the information? Who can help me? Are they going to charge me? Is it going to be hard to get services? People have very basic information, neat questions, but in the absence of the information, it's organizations like yours and ours that can partner and collaborate to help get this information out there. So yeah, thanks again, Dolores. And here's something great. So we have Fernando Gonzalez, who has a question for you. So Jessica, here's what Fernando says. Jessica, great information being shared. So that's another thumbs up for you there. But he has a great question. He says, what are the most prevalent health conditions associated to disabilities? Great question, right? Because you referenced earlier, for instance, that 1 in 4 Americans have disabilities.
Correct.
And that means his question relates to that 25%. What are the more prevalent disabilities that exist? It's because it tells the story about the national situation.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to ask you to take it a step further, too. I loved when you said 1 in 6 Latinos have disabilities. So that's a
Mm-hmm.
different question about a particular group, which we have very special interest in, and anything you may say about what's prevalent in the Latino community. So let's start with the first question, which is, what are the most prevalent health conditions associated to disabilities?
The two most common and more prevalent disabilities are mobility disabilities and cognitive disabilities. So what is what is a mobility impairment? What is a mobility disability? Someone who has a physical disability such as cerebral palsy or spina bifida, or they're missing a limb. They require the use of a wheelchair or a walking cane, anything that helps them kind of stay mobile, right, to get around. And the other one, like I mentioned earlier, was cognitive disabilities. So intellectual disabilities, Down syndrome, anything related to cognitive processing are the most prevalent ones. And those are also the more prevalent health conditions in Latino communities as well. So it's just that. And that's not to say there isn't, that those are the only ones. There's so many more, right? There's a long list of them as well. So.
All right, very good. Thank you for sharing that. Because you also, in part, kind of let us know that because these are prevalent conditions, you triggered for me something. There are some conditions that people are born with, and there are some conditions that occur during the person's lifetime that cause those two types of impairments. So anything you want to say about that, right? Those that people who at the children, infants at the time that they're born, may in fact have been genetically impacted in terms of what happens to them during that period of time before they're born that results in a condition that may be disabling from the very onset of their life versus folks that might become impaired both cognitively and mobility wise during the course of their life, like a car accident, for instance, right? But anyway, say some more about that, just because I think
Sure.
you're helping us explore this subject, and we want to be able to make this subject such easy
Yes.
enough conversation that people can say, "Gosh, I hadn't thought about that. Mira, primita, did you
Mhm.
know that Jessica said that 1 in 4 people are impaired, right, with a disability?" It lets people feel comfortable talking about it, ¿verdad? And so if
Yes.
we can encourage smaller platicas or charlas, because
Yes.
that's how we can with each other, right? So go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, so there are some disabilities that you're born with, Um, you could be born with Down syndrome. Down syndrome is not something you acquire later in life, versus um, being in a car accident and losing a limb or losing the ability to walk. Those are acquired later versus I guess congenital, I think is the word. Disabilities, you're kind of born with it, or even traumatic brain injuries. So if somebody's was the manner in which they were born could cause them to have a disability, whether that is like an injury to their body, and that causes them to have a disability. So it's important to distinguish both, right? Some you acquire later in life, and some you're born with, and it really just depends on that.
Well, Fernando, of course, had another question, by the
Oh.
way. I want you to know. So that means you really have piqued Fernando's curiosity, but he had a great question. He says, "What can you tell us about stigma?" Wow, what a great question. I mean, you probably hear this, deal with this, you've seen it, you have observed it somehow, but great question. And what can you tell us? Because if the center has a mission and education and information, stigma somehow is going to impact your your curriculums, your challenges, and how do you address it? So say a little bit more about that, Jessica.
Stigma. It's one of those things. We don't. Well, I'm speaking on my own personal experience. We don't really talk about it, right? I mean, at least um, in my community, at least my family, you don't really talk about stuff like that. It's stigmatized. It's seen as weakness, right? Having a disability is seen as something so awful, and so I don't want that. I don't want to be associated with that. And I think this is a good conversation to have. Is just talk about it. It's not a bad thing to have. It's not anyone's fault, that someone has a disability, and I think we just have to have these very uncomfortable conversations sometimes with people about these negatively associated things with the disability community. And I think it's important that we just that we understand that it's okay to have disabilities. It's okay to have mental illness. It's okay to just to be different, and how do we get that conversation started like this? You just talk about it and understand that it's okay. It's okay, it's okay for these things to happen. And I think the more we talk about it, the less taboo, the less that negative association is paired with it. Yeah, it's just it's a little bit difficult for me to talk about because um, it's just we never talked about it at home, and you know um, sometimes you kind of keep stuff in there, and it's nice to have some resources to talk to, or not talk to, but just to learn more about, like, oh my goodness, it's not just me. I'm not alone in it. There's help for me. There's resources. Like, oh, it's just a relief. And as I've learned in my journey at the ADA Center, I've learned a lot like about it. And it's okay to talk about it. And it's time to have these tough conversations, even if they make us feel a little bit uncomfortable. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
you just modeled for hundreds of us, and we want this to get to thousands of people to do precisely what you just said, right?
yeah.
You were honest, you were candid, but then you also shared what it feels like, and you described really what are the challenges within our communities about what we have learned to do in terms of protecting our privacy,
Mhm.
keeping the family's confidentiality. And as we like to say in the Latino community, what happens in our family stays at home and we take care of it. And I say,
Mhm.
well, that's really good because if you really are taking care of it, then you should be talking about it
Yes.
because con la boca cerrada no entra la mosca, right? So
Yeah.
we want people to be able to learn, right? Because
Yes.
both of us working professionals don't know everything. So
Mhm.
imagine the folks who don't have a lot of that information or training or work experience related to these subject matters. They oftentimes rely on us to have this conversation
Yeah.
because we feel confident about it. So there is nothing wrong. I want Latino communities to, there's nothing wrong with having these conversations at home because then you have, like you say, the privacy to be able to address this, but not addressing it, not
Yes.
talking about it is basically something that creates an opportunity for us to rethink, okay? Because part of what happens, the Latino community has its own forms of stigmatization, right?
Yes. Yes.
Here's some expressions we use, right, to kind of bring it home. This is how we things. Here's how we use culture and language, right? Um, no se le prende el foco, right? Expression
Yes.
his lights don't come on. Se le fueron las cabras. He lost his goats. Uh,
Literally.
yeah, right. And right, yeah, and then so ese sí está bien loco, right? And
Yes.
we have a whole set of stigmatizing language in the Latino community that's not in mainstream America, right? And so what's happening is, gosh darn, if we're taking care of that at home that way, we're stigmatizing our own, right? And I think what we're trying to do, you and I, is to say we can change what we say. We can start to say things because in part we're talking about our loved ones, right?
Yeah.
And my sister who suffers from chronic paranoid schizophrenia is not less than I am. She didn't ask for this illness because I knew her before she was stricken by the illness. I saw
Mhm.
it when she was stricken by it, and I then was involved with it post diagnosis. And if we ourselves can't be hopeful and demonstrate how to be supportive and be able to talk about these things for the benefit of our loved ones, then we may be perpetrating shame and isolation for something we don't know enough about, right? So we want to educate and inform. So thank you, Jessica, for touching base on that, because Fernando wanted to get your perspective. And of course, several folks, I'd like you to just be sure to look to the chat and response because Dolores definitely wants to stay in communications with you. And she has basically just said, please, let's do this. As she said, I love this. There is no shame, only deep appreciation and celebrating solidarity of the beautiful courage to come back into our spirit hearts. So she's right, right? In other words, what historically used to be something to be shamed of, or that we would lock away our family members in the back room, never to let them be seen in the public, right? What we're saying is with compassion and information and a kind heart to support others is how we deliver and cause hope so people can get help and treatment and the kinds of things that improve the quality of their life. Folks who are incapacitated or disabled oftentimes are the victim of circumstances way beyond their control. So we want to be able to help people get that information. So here we are. My gosh, this has been such a powerful session.
Yes.
I'm so glad explored this topic with us, Jessica, because in large measure, this is exactly how we do get the word out, right? So I hope that the collaboration between the Rocky Mountain ADA Center and NALBA can help to continue to address these kinds of issues, because our mission and our work is, in fact, to reduce the great disparities that impact the Latino well-being. And what impacts them? Our disabilities and disabling conditions. And because of that, we can ensure that people can learn about resources, get help as they need it, and help them have a quality of life that they deserve, right?
Yes.
Because what happens is people do recover, and they recover in different ways. We want to encourage that, because recovery, when you see it and witness it or experience it, it's a powerful thing. That's precisely what our moms used to do, right? They would be worried about us because, hija, ten mucho cuidado, be careful out there, right? Remember,
Yes.
I would venture your mom gave you that kind of advice, or at least your grandma, your madrina, right?
Yes.
And why
I
is
still
it?
get it. I'm 37 years old. I will be 37 years old and next week or a week and a half. And she still does that to me. Con cuidado, ten cuidado, me marcas cuando llegues, call me when you get there. I share my location services with my mom, so she's like, "You're almost home, right?" They want what's best for us, right? They just want us to be safe. They want us to come back in one piece, so to speak. But yeah, it's what it is growing up, right? Latino. The parents
Yeah.
they just care. That's what. And I was upset about it when I was in high school, because I was in high school and I wanted to go out with my friends, and I don't want my dad picking me up in that old hunk of junk car. Park all the way over there in the corner. Don't come over here. But they meant well. They always meant well, So thanks, Mom. She's in the other room, but yes, thank you.
You're absolutely right. But so part of our cultural upbringing, right? So regardless of your race or ethnicity, right? All of us have culture and language aspects to our upbringing, right? Because the cultures have to do with the things we believe in, the things we value, the things that we promote in terms of our heritage, and the things we want to continue to do, right? So, you're talking about really what's very unique to the Latino community is we have a very strong family and natural support system. It's been in place
Yes.
for a very long time. And that's why we depend on each other so much, right? Is because we rely on maybe what your older sister knows that you don't know, right? Or you rely on your brother, the consentido of the family, because he can influence mom and dad to help address this issue so they don't get so mad at you when you bring something to their attention, right?
Yes.
All of that coping mechanisms. It's about how we communicate. It's about how we interact, how we problem solve, because those practices, those norms, those behaviors are part of how we grow up. That forms our cultural behaviors, right? In other words, what it is that we believe in, right? And what do we do believe in, right? We believe in respecting our elders, right? So, and here's a particular issue that's very significant, is those of us who serve as caregivers, right? So if you serve as a caregiver, that has an impact because you're caregiving for someone who may be disabled or incapacitated, or an infant. You're caregiving an infant thing, right? But the point being is that caregiving is something that's very much part of our family natural support system, right? And as you said, and I'd like you to speak to this a little bit before we get to the final question for today's show, and that is self-care. It's a fancy word today that people are using, right? But it's an important thing, right? So what I want to say is that what's being promoted and advocate is just now realizing that when you care for others, how significant an impact that has on the person who's caregiving. So I want you to talk a little bit about self-care and caregiving, because they're cousins to each other, right? Caring for one other person is one aspect, but how do you care for yourself is another, and how do they connect, right? So say a little bit more about that, just from your own kind of cultural experiences and even from your professional experience.
Yeah. So self-care. It's hard to find self-care time sometimes because I'm gonna go back a little bit. I had a baby during the pandemic. My daughter was born in April of 2020. So thank you. I just moved out here. I got pregnant, and then the baby was born during the middle of the pandemic. So you can imagine all the added stress that came with pandemic life and raising a child, and also being a caregiver for my mother, and just trying to keep everything together, and at the same time working. So sometimes it's so. First for me, just for my experience, I'm the kind of person that I want to do everything. And sometimes I have a hard time accepting help. And I think that's because of just I like things done a certain way. But I think it's important that I think self-care is accepting help from somebody else is a form of self-care, because you're relinquishing or you're relieving some of the responsibilities that are preventing you from doing or being your 100% self, right? So I think it's important to remember that you're not alone, and there's people in your community, in your close-knit community, the immediate group, that are there to help you. And I had to learn that my spouse is here, and so is my mom, to help us all out. We're gonna get through it together. But at the same time, I have to find time to separate myself from whatever it is that's happening, just so that I can have some time to reflect, whether it's reading a book that I haven't read in a while, or just drawing, because I love to draw. I love to doodle, and I miss doing that. So it's so important to find time for yourself, because it's just not only that you find time for yourself, but it like clears your mind. You look at things at a different way. It's like, oh, it's like it's fresher, right? Or things are like they bring more joy, like things you're looking forward to. Like you're not looking like, oh, I don't want to do that. But it's like, oh, it might be fun to get out and get some sun, and living here, it's important to get lots of fresh air. So it's very important to while we're taking care of others, to also take care of ourselves as often as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you for personalizing this. Oftentimes in professional settings, personal disclosures are always kind of frowned upon or not encouraged. But our lived experiences tell us a lot. It informs us all about how we decide things, why we do things the way we do, and then how we grow, right? And you talked a little bit about that in terms of how we all get to grow in terms of our own ability to kind of cope with life circumstances. And as you said, juggling multiple things, right? It's like juggling a bowling ball, a tennis ball, a chainsaw, and who knows what else, trying to do all of that. And so part of that is, and that's a little bit about how in American culture, right, there's a lot of effort paid to being highly productive, experiencing stress and managing it, but you really want to accomplish things. Well, the thing about it is that in these modern times, stress has a negative consequence too, right? It's going to have an impact on our emotional and physical well-being. Today, you have really helped us to understand both the work of the center. You helped us kind of cover ground on behavioral health issues. Thank you for personalizing aspects of this. And we'd like to now kind of bring us to some closure for today's Platica. And I'd like you to give folks something that they can take away from today, right? So now you've had a chance to hear some of the comments. We want to say thank you to those folks who took the time to listen in. As Dolores said, she did this during her lunch hour.
Yes, thank you, Dolores. Right. Thank you. And I did see the comments on sharing links on our podcast, and I'll make sure to make sure that all that information is in there after we wrap this all up.
Oh, that's
so thank you, and thank you everybody else for joining us today.
Yeah, that's right. And you'll have folks who will post, as I said, after the recorded session. But today, before we let you go, doesn't mean that we don't get to see you some other time and interface with you some other time. But for today, what would you like folks to take away from today? So we're
All
going
right.
to over to you before we close the show.
One of the biggest takeaways I hope that our viewers, listeners can take away from this is that there's so much information out there about the ADA and about issues that are important to us. And I encourage everybody to just take a course, check out our website, check out, just learn some more information, pick a topic and or reach out to us. If you had questions about it, it's okay to reach out to us. We're not going to turn you away or anything like that. We're here to help you. We're here to provide all this wonderful information that can help you or someone close to you. So the knowledge is power, right? So it's important to arm ourselves with knowledge and share, and then take that knowledge that we took, that we acquired, and share with everybody else that we can, as many people as possible, so that we're all talking about it.
That's beautiful. Well, Jessica Luzanilla, and I still want to know what Luzanilla means, or if you have a definition for it. But
I wish I knew, but actually, my dad told the story that my abuelo, his father, it was actually spelled Luzanilla without the double L, so it's Luzania. But I don't know, my abuelo just kind of made it up. It's one of those made up last names. And if you ever see another Luzania, we're related. It's us. It's our group. So he just modified it. I honestly don't know why. He wanted to make it sound pretty, I guess, is at least the thought that I have, right? So yeah,
very
we're the
cool.
only
Well,
Luzanias in the country. So
I've not heard the name, so it caught my attention, but we want to thank you, Jessica, for being here with us today and to sharing about the work that you do. And as an instructional designer, I would have never have thought of that title, but hey, aprendí algo hoy, ¿verdad? I learned
yes.
something today. But we appreciate you, and of course the ADA Rocky Mountain Center for making it possible for you to join us today. And as we get ready to close up for today's Platica, we want to invite all of you who listened to today's show to look for the recorded version and share it at your end with your peers, your colleagues, and your families too, right? Because what we want to do is we want to inform and reach out to our community, and who better than us to be the messengers, ¿verdad? Right? So
Yes,
hoy
absolutely.
les pregunto y les pido que sean parte de la palomía, right? I'm asking you today to be part of this grouping of us who can then pass this message on to others so that they can benefit from information they don't have that we have. And
Yes.
and with that, I'd like to say thank you to all of you who took the time during your lunch hours or wherever you may have called from. And thank you for joining us today. Again, this is Fred Sandoval with the National Latino Behavioral Health Association. We want to thank Jessica for being with us here today, and to the New Mexico State Behavioral Health Services Division and the Office of Peer Recovery and Engagement for continuing to make recovery an important effort in our state and our country to benefit those who work so hard to be in recovery, and so we can support and maintain that. So with that, muchísimas gracias. Thank you all. We'll continue to be in touch in next month's Platica. Adios.